Good morning. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you so much for that introduction. I just want to share how we in human resources use the Conscious Ambassador principles and how we can integrate in every aspect of our human resource work with all clients in all organizations, et cetera. And so people often have set ideas about what human resources is. And so I wanted to give you a brief overview of what's included in human resource responsibilities. And so as we discuss some of these trauma-informed principles, you can see that there's really a lot of opportunity for human resource professionals to incorporate those principles, some of which present themselves quite naturally, honestly, but they're not necessarily intentional, and it takes a lot more time. As we look at the effects of trauma in the workplace, we know that coming out of this COVID pandemic, more people are looking at increased isolation, increased caregiving opportunities and responsibilities, particularly since the child care centers were closed. Our boomer generation is really entering their twilight years. So you've kind of got sandwich generations taking care of those at home that are younger and aging parents at the same time. We've dealt with loss, an increase of domestic violence, and an increase in food insecurity due to loss of employment. And then you have people of color and women and other communities that are vulnerable that have been dealing with the microaggressions, systemic racism and discrimination that have long been bringing trauma into the workplace for them on a daily basis. So this ongoing trauma, they show up in different ways. Absenteeism, change in behavior, substance disorders, physical and mental challenges. And then there's also that increased conflict between coworkers and groups, polarization, loss of motivation. So sometimes these effects don't even show up until much later, and they may not be recognized even by the employees themselves, what's happening and what they're going through. And so it's really incumbent upon good managers and good HR professionals to just be proactively mindful of the workforce and be watching for these things amongst our teams and checking in with each other. So one of the reasons that I'm a human resource professional and not a civil rights lawyer like I thought I would be is because I wanted to make more of a difference and more of an impact to more people who were systemically locked out of access to the ability to take care of themselves and their families. And so that's why I chose human resources. There's this quote, and I cannot for the life of me remember who I got it from. I think it might be Brian Stevenson. I'm not quite sure, but it says the opposite of injustice is access. And so I always thought the opposite of injustice was justice, but how do you implement justice? And the way that you do that is by giving access. And so as human resource professionals, the trauma-informed principles really allow us to consider how to give people access to employment, to better opportunities, to promotions, to increased opportunities for development, real development for their careers and their livelihoods. And so if we look at the human resource space or the employment relationship, you've got pre-employment, you've got onboarding and orientation, you've got the ongoing employment relationship, and then you've got post-employment. So if I had to group each of the areas for employees, I would choose those 4 areas. And so in pre-employment, that's everything that is before the actual start date. So how do you recruit? How do you advertise for jobs? Where do you do that so that the lion's share of people can have access to that? Do you look at different job boards or different communities and how they receive information? So younger generation might be social media. There's still an older generation that might use online job boards or even print. And so you have to consider from a diversity lens, what is your makeup of your job force and how are you going to communicate with them so that everyone has the opportunity to know about open positions. So that's one way we can use the consideration of the human and what their needs are, what their experience is, where they are, and how they access information. So it really takes into consideration how we communicate with people all along the way of their employment relationship. So that could include job descriptions, because you've got to post job ads, right? What are the specific skills? You've got to consider background checks. Are you going to do those? What if people do have background considerations? Are those considerations really necessary for the role that you're hiring for? So are there limitations that are unnecessary to have people apply? Do people know the time frames for application? Are the salaries and benefits really framed in a way that's beneficial to more people than less people? What do people think is important in terms of benefits? In your interview process, are you asking legal questions? Are you asking illegal questions? Do they really have to do with the job? And so you might say, well, do you have a car? That's not a harmful question, but do I need a car to have this job, or do I just need to get to work on time? Do I have a reliable mode of transportation that gets me to the job on a regular basis? If the answer is yes, it doesn't matter if I have a car, because what if I can't afford a car? So those are types of things that we have to take into consideration, how we're asking questions, how we're limiting people's ability to apply to jobs because we've asked the less important questions. So it gives us an opportunity, again, to frame how we communicate with individuals to find out if they can come in and work in the organizations in which we're hiring for. Then we have the onboarding orientation. So this is the time between, some people will call it the orientation period of three months, probation period. I hate that word probation. It reminds me of jail, but that probation period where you're trying to figure out if the candidate is the new employee is a good fit. And if you want to continue their employment. And so even though it's an at-will state in many instances, most states are at will, there's still an opportunity for you to further define if someone is really skilled and a fit for the organization in the role that they're in. And so this is really a critical point for using those trauma-informed principles. Again, if you're doing it intentionally, it's going to take a little bit more time to understand if they're proficient or not. And so it also helps them understand the engagement relationship. And so when I think about this aspect of orientation and onboarding, we're looking at what the initial expectations are. They clearly communicated. Do they know when they're going to get their performance reviews and what's going to be reviewed? How do they see themselves achieving the things that need to be achieved and meeting those goals so that they can see a career path for themselves? How does the current staff meet and greet and support the new employee? What opportunities are available for new employees? How are they given feedback, et cetera? So there's a lot in there that we can do in terms of creating safety, being transparent and clear in our communication, and also getting peer support during this period. Then there's the ongoing employment So this stage of employment is defined as the time following onboarding where you're just generally using good HR practices to support retention. You want to engage and retain that employee, but you also don't want to increase any trauma that they may have experienced in their lives as we get to know them and what their needs are. And so then the questions become what processes in place to build and support a diverse and inclusive work environment? How does staff have a voice and choice in performing their work? How are those principles incorporated into the performance management process? Are they also included in the internal investigation process? How do employees give feedback to the organization? How are they informed of career opportunities? So there's a whole host of ways that we can engage and retain employees. Giving voice is one of the more important things, because if you don't know what's important to people, you're not going to be able to retain them, because you won't be able to meet their expectations or level set those if that's the case. Then we have post-employment. So what is the procedure to address safe and empowering offboarding? So post-employment could be someone is terminated, they could be pursuing a new position or a career, they could be retiring. So there's many reasons why a person will leave an organization, but there is a way that they can leave the organization that is not the traditional contentious way, even if they get fired. Sometimes it's just not a good fit. And so we have to be okay with creating that safe and trusting offboarding process so that people can even come back to the organization. So if it's an organization that offers community services, we want them to feel comfortable to still come back and use those community resources, because they're there to be used for everyone. And so we're not trying to eliminate them coming back, unless of course they're dangerous, but most people, they're just not a fit for that particular work or that organization, or there's a layoff, or again, a whole host of reasons. But we want people to be able to still stay on, to be able to train their successor, to really support the employee as they're leaving, as well as the remaining employees. I think if you notice, sometimes when an employee leaves, if they leave abruptly, then other people are nervous about their jobs. They don't know if there is a layoff coming for them as well. So communication really is key. Immediate communication is key to allay any fears, or to communicate that indeed is the case. So the earlier the communication, the more trust is maintained, and then people can make their decisions on what they want to do with their careers and their lives. So again, what support is offered to the existing and remaining employees to address any exits, what procedures are in place to show gratitude to the existing employees or the exiting employees, and then how is the transition of company and personal property, as well as access to the organization, accomplished. So we want to be able, again, to still have communication. Sometimes people may not want that, but it's there to be offered.